Bonjour tout le monde. This week is off to a productive start. Yesterday, Minister Miller signed a new, co-developed protocol with National Chief Bellegarde to move forward on much-needed reforms of Indigenous child and family services. It should be up to Indigenous peoples to decide what is best for their children, families, and communities, and with this protocol, we're taking another important step in the right direction. We also announced new investments to expand access to cultural, emotional, and mental health support services for those affected by the national tragedy of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, as well as the federal Indian Day Schools Settlement Agreement. To continue walking the road of reconciliation, we must work with survivors, families, communities on the support they need. There's still much to be done, but yesterday's announcements are another important step along our shared path. Au cours des 2 derniers jours, nous avons tenu une rencontre virtuelle du Conseil des ministres. C'était l'occasion pour notre équipe de se rassembler après un début d'année mouvementé et d'établir nos priorités pour les semaines et les mois à venir. Nous avons d'abord parlé de la pandémie, de ses conséquences sur l'économie et de ce que notre gouvernement peut et doit faire pour combattre le racisme systémique. Je vais commencer par nos discussions concernant la pandémie. Lundi, nous nous sommes entretenus avec la Dr Tam, administratrice en chef de la santé publique, la Dr Nimmer, conseillère scientifique en chef, et le Dr Naylor, qui dirige le groupe de travail sur l'immunité face à la COVID-19. Depuis le début, notre réponse s'appuie sur la science et les données, et c'est ce qu'on va continuer à faire lorsqu'on commence à reprendre certaines activités. C'est la seule façon de protéger les Canadiens et d'en finir pour le bon avec la COVID-19. Earlier this week, we held a 2-day virtual cabinet retreat. We talked about how the virus is progressing across the country, as well as our response so far. Later today, we'll be releasing a public health modeling update on COVID-19 in Canada. We'll have more details then, but for now, I want to give a quick overview. Last week, we said that nationally, the number of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths is declining over time. That is still the case today. The situation is stabilizing in Canada because Canadians did their part and followed public health instructions. But we still have to be very careful. Things can change quickly. As Dr. Tam will explain later, we still have some hotspots in some parts of the country, including in long-term care facilities and agricultural work settings. So as we continue to gradually reopen the economy, we have to remain vigilant. We have to keep following public health advice. La COVID-19 a provoqué non seulement une crise sanitaire, mais une crise économique. C'était l'un des grands thèmes que nous avons abordés au cours de la rencontre du Conseil des ministres. Beaucoup de gens n'ont pas pu aller travailler pendant plusieurs semaines, tandis que d'autres ont perdu leur emploi. Et bien que tous les secteurs de l'économie aient ressenti les conséquences de la pandémie, certains ont été plus durement touchés que d'autres. Pour mieux comprendre les conséquences de la pandémie sur notre économie, on va publier un portrait de l'économie et des finances publiques plus tard cet après-midi. Le ministre Morneau aura plus de détails à vous fournir là-dessus, mais voici ce qu'il faut retenir. Quand la pandémie nous a frappés, beaucoup de gens ont perdu leur job du jour au lendemain. Ils ne savaient pas comment ils allaient nourrir leur famille ou payer leurs factures. Face à un défi sans précédent, notre gouvernement avait 2 choix. On pouvait laisser les Canadiens se débrouiller et espérer que tout ça se terminerait rapidement, ou on pouvait agir rapidement pour aider les Canadiens. On a choisi d'appuyer les Canadiens. Aujourd'hui, le Canada a l'un des plans les plus ambitieux et exhaustifs dans le monde pour lutter contre la pandémie. On a augmenté le soutien financier accordé aux groupes vulnérables comme les aînés et les étudiants. On a offert des prêts aux entreprises qui avaient des problèmes de liquidité. On a aidé les employeurs à réembaucher leurs employés et on a soutenu ceux qui avaient perdu leur emploi. On parle de près de 11 millions de Canadiens qui ont reçu l'aide de la subvention salariale d'urgence ou de la PCU. Notre gouvernement à dépenser pour pouvoir empêcher que les Canadiens aient trop à s'endetter. On a pu faire ça parce que le Canada est entré dans cette crise sur une base solide, avec un ratio de la dette nette nationale par rapport au PIB considérablement plus bas que les autres pays du G7. Notre gouvernement était en bonne position pour venir en aide aux Canadiens et jeter les bases qui vont permettre à notre économie de rebondir. 4 mois plus tard, on a ralenti la propagation du virus et on est maintenant au stade où on peut voir certains secteurs de l'économie rouvrir. Et avec des taux d'intérêt historiquement bas, le coût d'emprunt demeure bas et donc notre gouvernement va continuer d'investir dans les Canadiens et dans notre économie. C'est clair que la relance présente plusieurs défis. Certains secteurs vont rebondir plus rapidement que d'autres. Certaines personnes vont être capables de trouver un nouvel emploi rapidement, mais ça va prendre plus de temps pour d'autres. Alors, au moment où on passe au stade de la relance, les Canadiens peuvent compter sur nous de toujours être à leur côté. To better understand the impacts of COVID-19 on our economy, we will be releasing a fiscal and economic snapshot this afternoon. Minister Morneau will have more to say on this later today, but for now, I want to talk about the main takeaways. When the pandemic first hit, a lot of people lost their jobs overnight. They didn't know how they were going to feed their families or pay their bills. Faced with this unprecedented challenge, our government had 2 options. We could sit back, let Canadians fend for themselves and hope that it would all be over soon, or we could swiftly and substantially choose to support Canadians. We chose to support Canadians. As we measure the cost of helping Canadians, we shouldn't forget that the cost of doing nothing would have been far more to both our health care and our economy. This is not and has not been a time for tightening of belts or for austerity. By building a bridge for Canadians through this crisis, we can and will build a stronger, more resilient Canada. Today, Canada has one of the most ambitious and comprehensive plans to counter the economic impacts of this pandemic. We increased financial support to vulnerable groups like seniors and students. We provided loans to businesses struggling with cash flow, helped employers rehire their employees, and supported those who had lost their jobs. In fact, nearly 11 million Canadians have been supported through the Emergency Wage Subsidy or the CERB. Our government took on debt to reduce the amount that Canadians themselves had to take on. We were able to do this because Canada entered this crisis on strong footing with a net debt to GDP ratio considerably lower than the rest of the G7. Our government was well positioned to be there for Canadians and lay the groundwork for our economy to bounce back. 4 months later, we've slowed down the progression of the virus significantly, and we're now seeing parts of the economy reopen. And historically low interest rates mean manageable borrowing costs as we continue to invest in Canadians and in the economy. Now, the road to recovery will not be an easy one. Some sectors will bounce back more quickly than others. Some people will be able to find work, but others won't right away. But as we move into this recovery phase, Canadians can count on us to always be in their corner. Over the past 2 days, our team also talked about what concrete steps this government must take to fight racism and build a more inclusive Canada. Because here are the facts. Prejudice, discrimination, and violence are a lived reality for far too many Canadians. And it's the result of systems which all too often condone, normalize, perpetrate, and perpetuate inequality and injustice against racialized people. Our government pledged to work with racialized communities and Indigenous peoples to address systemic racism. Over the last 5 years, we've invested in mental health resources for Black youth and worked to close the gaps in services for Indigenous communities. And we now have Canada's anti-racism strategy, which has begun its work to change the way we do things and break down barriers. We've made progress, but it's nowhere near enough. So Cabinet has put together a work plan for the summer months. Our goal is to come up with strong policies that will help eliminate barriers facing Indigenous peoples, racialized people, and persons with disabilities. Minister Lametti is working on justice reforms. Minister Blair is focused on modernizing policing structures and updating standards regarding the use of force. Ministers Baines and Ng are looking at improving access to capital and generating more capacity. Ministers Mendicino and Qualtrough are exploring ways to ensure better protection for temporary foreign workers. And Ministers Blair and Miller are committed to co-developing a legislative framework which recognizes First Nations policing as an essential service and expand the number of communities served by First Nations policing. We have our work cut out for us, but we're ready. Fighting systemic racism, unconscious bias, and discrimination is a top priority for our government, and we will continue to listen and work with communities and allies to build a better Canada. I want to end today by congratulating Bob Rae on his appointment as Canada's ambassador to the United Nations. Ambassador Rae has dedicated his life to serving Canada, most recently as Canada's Special Envoy on Humanitarian and Refugee Issues, and before that as Canada's Special Envoy to Myanmar. In these roles, he worked closely with the UN and the international community to help lead Canada's humanitarian efforts. I know he will build on the work of Ambassador Marc-André Blanchard and defend our interests and our values with integrity. Je tiens aussi à remercier l'ambassadeur Blanchard pour ses nombreuses années de service exceptionnels. Marc-André a su renforcer nos amitiés et bâtir des ponts avec des nouveaux partenaires tout au long de son mandat. Je lui souhaite le meilleur des succès pour la suite des choses. I'm now happy to take your questions.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va commencer la période de questions aujourd'hui avec les journalistes dans la salle.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. Last week, you told reporters that the We Charity contract awarding followed a transparent and open process. Did that include Cabinet approving the contract?
The recommendation to use We to get opportunities out for young people was made by the Public Service. But as a cabinet, we ratify those decisions. It was really important for us to give opportunities to young people, and remains important to give opportunities to young people through this pandemic to be able to engage in their communities, support local organizations, and make a difference at a time where far too many people, and particularly young people, don't have the opportunities because of this pandemic.
And did you recuse yourself from that discussion and the decision at Cabinet?
No, I did not. I
Why not?
Long worked on youth issues, both as before I got into politics and since I've been in politics as youth critic, getting young people involved in serving their country, recognizing their desire to build a better Canada, particularly through this time of crisis, is something that I believe in deeply.
Thank you. Stephanie Lewitz, CP.
Stephanie Lewitz, the Canadian Press. Good morning. How is it that you're going to begin reshaping federal aid programs as you go ahead forward, when the reality is most parents still don't have a full-time place to put their kids at the end of the day, despite the $14 billion you've promised the province? Or do you just not see that as the Prime Minister's problem to solve?
I think as we look at creating jobs and creating economic growth across the economy, we need to know that one of the significant barriers to everyone participating is access to childcare. There are parts of this country where there is better access to childcare than others. And there is no question that our encouraging of provinces to improve access to safer childcare spaces right across the country is part of why we've set out $14 billion for the provinces. And we certainly hope that they will take that money and move forward on ensuring better childcare and safer childcare for kids across the country. It's not just about doing the right thing at a time of vulnerability. It's about growing our economy in meaningful ways and allowing people to get back to work. The federal government will use the levers that we have, respecting, of course, that it is an area of provincial jurisdiction.
And I guess maybe this will touch on what you just announced about this work plan on systemic racism. But earlier today, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh said that Donald Trump had done more to directly address police brutality than your own government. And I wonder if in this work plan is going to come specific instruction to your ministers with regards to the RCMP and with regards to police brutality.
As I said, we need to end systemic racism in this country, and that includes looking carefully at what happens in our police forces and changing the protocols and ways that our police forces operate. The Minister Blair is engaged in looking specifically at that, on working with partners and ensuring that we do make substantive changes to how policing is delivered across this country, alongside many other things that need to be addressed to go at the systemic racism that exists throughout Canada, whether it's justice reform, whether it's access to capital for Black entrepreneurs, whether it's support for Indigenous businesses, whether it's ensuring that we're allowing access to childcare and support services right across the country for vulnerable communities. These are things that we as an entire government are going to be working on, because we need to take the right action in concert with vulnerable communities, working with them, listening to them, but we need to do it quickly as well, and that's what we're focused on.
Prime Minister Molly Thomas, CTV National News. The Auditor General says the CBSA has lost track of tens of thousands of people that were set for deportation. Most are rejected asylum seekers, many for criminal reasons. What is going on here, and what is the plan to fix this?
Canada has a strong immigration system, and we ensure that the rules are applied. I want to thank the Auditor General for highlighting challenges at the CBSA in ensuring that we're getting things exactly right. And we will work on the recommendations put forward. We will make sure that we're doing a better job of ensuring the integrity of our immigration system. We will be looking very closely and following the recommendations made by the Auditor General.
No plan, specifically? Prime Minister, my second question. In December, the finance minister said the estimated deficit would be $28 billion. We're looking, what we're hearing, it looks like it could be 10 times that. Do you feel the spending has gotten out of control, or are you looking at extending emergency programs?
We made a very specific and deliberate choice throughout this pandemic to help Canadians, to recognize that overnight people had lost their jobs, people had suddenly found themselves in a precarious situation and needed support. So as a federal government, given the historically low interest rates and the low debt servicing costs that we have, and given our extremely strong fiscal position going in, we decided to take on that debt to prevent Canadians from having to do it. If the federal government hadn't taken on significant debt in order to send money to Canadians to support businesses and households, what would Canadians have done? They would have loaded up their credit cards. They would have scrambled to try and find ways to pay their bills and pay their groceries and figure out how to care for their loved ones. We took on debt so Canadians wouldn't have to. And we can be confident about our position because it worked to reduce the spread of COVID-19, and we now have the spread largely under control, although we need to continue to remain vigilant. We went into this challenge with a far better fiscal position than many of our allies around the world, which allows us to come through it in a very strong way. And we know that by supporting Canadians through this pandemic, we maximize our chances of getting back on our feet as quickly as possible as an economy. I know there are people out there who said we should have done less. but I think that's wrong. Now was the time for the federal government to step up and help Canadians during a historic crisis, and that's exactly what we did. And having done that has allowed us to get the virus more under control and is allowing us to restart the economy in a strong position, unlike many of our other allies.
Merci. On va maintenant passer au téléphone. Opérateur, c'est à vous.
Thank you. Merci. Please press star 1 on the telephone keypad if you have a question. Faites étoile 1 sur votre téléphone à clavier pour des questions. La première question est de Raymond Fillon, TVA. À vous.
Merci. Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Pour poursuivre sur la même veine que ma collègue Marley, on sait déjà que le déficit que M. Morneau va nous annoncer tout à l'heure sera historique. Qu'est-ce que vous dites aux Canadiens qui risquent de sursauter peut-être en voyant ce montant-là et s'inquiéter que le Canada vit au-dessus de ses moyens sur la carte de crédit?
Je pense que la première chose que les Canadiens doivent se rappeler, c'est qu'on est entré dans cette pandémie avec une meilleure position fiscale que beaucoup de nos alliés. On avait le plus bas taux de dette par rapport à notre PIB de tous les pays du G7 et on a pu donc investir sans avoir trop d'impact sur notre stabilité fiscale. En plus, il faut se souvenir que les taux d'intérêt sont historiquement bas et donc notre capacité de payer pour cette dette va être extrêmement gérable dans les années à venir. Il faut aussi souligner que, comparé à d'autres pays, nous sommes en très bonne position et de façon économique et par rapport à la gestion de la COVID-19. On a pu aider les Canadiens à rester chez eux, à se protéger pendant des mois pour que maintenant, on a le virus sous contrôle. Il faut continuer à demeurer vigilant. Il va falloir empêcher cette deuxième ou d'autres vagues. Mais nous avons fait ce qu'on avait besoin de faire pour permettre aux Canadiens de reprendre le contrôle et maintenant de relancer l'économie tranquillement. Mais il faut aussi se poser la question, si on n'avait pas investi pour aider les Canadiens, qu'est-ce que les Canadiens auraient fait? Ils auraient mis énormément plus de dépenses sur leur carte de crédit. Ils auraient pris des hypothèques de plus. Beaucoup d'entreprises auraient dû fermer de façon permanente. Et le fait qu'au fédéral, on a le coût d'emprunt le plus bas de tous les autres paliers de gouvernement, de tous les Canadiens, nous permet de savoir qu'on est en train de faire la bonne chose et notre économie va bien rebondir.
En suivi, Raymond?
Ceci dit, comment vous comptez vous y prendre pour payer la note? La cote de crédit du Canada récemment a été abaissée par une agence internationale. Est-ce que vous excluez des hausses de taxes, d'impôts, un report de certaines promesses électorales? Quel est votre plan?
Je pense qu'il faut savoir que d'augmenter les impôts, augmenter les taxes ou les impôts ou de couper dans les services serait la pire chose à faire maintenant. On ne va pas ajouter des dépenses et freiner la relance économique. On ne va pas limiter l'aide qu'on doit offrir aux Canadiens. On doit créer des emplois, on doit créer de la croissance économique et c'est exactement ce qu'on va faire. Mais il faut se souvenir qu'on est dans une situation semblable que bien d'autres pays, dans une situation bien meilleure que bien d'autres pays. Tout le monde a dû investir pour aider leurs citoyens, mais le Canada partait d'une meilleure position que beaucoup d'autres pays. Et en plus, on a su contrôler le virus d'une meilleure façon que plusieurs de nos alliés, incluant particulièrement notre voisin, ce qui veut dire qu'on peut commencer à relancer plus rapidement et de façon plus réussie notre économie que d'autres qui sont en train encore de vivre avec le virus de façon beaucoup plus active. On est en train de faire les bonnes choses pour aider les Canadiens et à cause de ça, notre économie va revenir plus rapidement et plus fortement que beaucoup de nos alliés.
Thank you. Operator, next question over the phone.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Rosemary Barton, CBC. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Thanks for taking our questions. I know today we're going to hear more about the state of the economy in terms of the decisions you've already taken. But I'm interested in knowing more about what decisions you have yet to take in terms of the recovery. Can you explain to Canadians why the recovery and stimulus that might be needed on the other side of this is going to be different, or how it will be different than it was during the last recession, please?
Well, I think obviously this recession is very different from the last recession. The challenges our economy are facing are linked to a public health emergency, a pandemic that has very, very different impacts on the economy than previous challenges faced over the past decades. That's why we're very much focused on holding things in place, on supporting Canadians so that they can make it through and protect their loved ones and protect our frontline workers and protect our vulnerable populations by giving them the support they need over these past months. That's what we chose to do. We're beginning to see the economy restart. And before we get into the full recovery and how we build back better, we need to make sure we are managing through the transition towards restarting. There are many Canadians getting back to work these weeks. There are many others who are still in a position where they can't find jobs. That's what we're very much focused on right now, because we're still very much in an urgent phase of this pandemic and this crisis.
Following up, Rosie?
Well, if I can just follow up. One of the things that the pandemic has done, obviously, is expose the most vulnerable in our society and the broad inequities that exist. How do you think the economy will look different in order to address some of those vulnerabilities and help those who have been most hurt by this?
I think there are going to be really important discussions and indeed political debates about that and about what our economy looks like for the coming years in the coming months. But I can tell you that from the very beginning, we focused on helping all Canadians with a particular focus on the most vulnerable Canadians. Canadians who didn't have access to EI and lost their jobs. Canadians who need to rely on shelters, whether it's people fleeing domestic violence, which was increased by the need to stay home, or people who are already living in the streets. We needed to increase our support for food banks. We need to make sure that Indigenous communities that are so vulnerable to health crises because of a lack of health system supports were extra protected. Throughout this pandemic, even as we sent out support to more than 11 million Canadians, we had a specific focus on the most vulnerable, because that's just who we are as Canadians, but also because we know that allowing and encouraging and giving the ability of everyone to participate, of reducing barriers as we move forward, is going to be extremely important. And I look forward to those discussions. Right now, we're still very much focused on helping people through this crisis.
Thank you. We'll take one last question on the floor.
Busy day domestically, of course, but down in D.C., we have the U.S. President Donald Trump, Mexican counterpart, having a meeting. You spoke to the Mexican president this week. Do you have plans to speak to Donald Trump after this meeting, and will you be discussing aluminum tariffs with him?
I speak reasonably regularly and have over the past many years with the U.S. president, and look forward to congratulating him and all of us on the coming into force of the new NAFTA, the USMCA. I think it's really important that at a time of economic strain and stress, we continue to have access to the world's most important market, and this is good for Canadian workers and Canadian jobs right across the country.
I wonder if I could just
At
ask
the
you
same
to...
time, we are concerned about the threat of extra tariffs on aluminum and possibly steel. This is something that, again, is a little bit difficult to understand, because the United States relies heavily on imports of Canadian aluminum in particular for their domestic manufacturing capacity. The U.S. doesn't make nearly enough aluminum to be able to cover its needs, particularly at a time where we want the economies to get going again across North America. So what tariffs would do would be to raise prices for manufacturers in the United States and put extra stress on them at a time where the stresses abound, which is why we are continuing to push very hard on encouraging the U.S. to not move forward on tariffs that we don't think have any justification and will have negative impacts.
I wonder if I could just ask you to repeat in French the answer you gave to Rosie about what you're thinking about going forward in terms of what these programs may or may not look like.
Depuis les tout débuts, nous savions que nous devions aider les Canadiens, et particulièrement les Canadiens les plus vulnérables. C'est pour ça que dès le début, l'aide qu'on a envoyée aux 11 millions de Canadiens, plus qu'11 millions de Canadiens, par la PCU et par la subvention salariale, a été concentrée sur les plus vulnérables, mais aussi on a aidé les banques alimentaires, les refuges pour victimes de violences domestiques, de l'aide pour les communautés autochtones. On sait que pendant cette crise, pendant toute crise, malheureusement, les plus vulnérables ont toujours les plus grands impacts. Et donc, nous devions de prêter attention à eux. Et c'est ce qu'on a fait. Dans les mois et les années à venir, sûrement qu'il va y avoir énormément de discussions et de débats politiques sur comment on relance et comment on rebâtit une économie plus forte pour les Canadiens. Mais je peux vous dire que l'aide aux plus vulnérables sera toujours au cœur de ce qu'on va faire parce que la meilleure façon de créer de la croissance, c'est de s'assurer que tout le monde puisse participer pleinement, qu'on réduise les barrières à la participation économique, qu'on réduise les iniquités qui existent à l'intérieur de nos systèmes. Nous allons toujours faire plus pour les Canadiens vulnérables parce que c'est la bonne chose à faire, mais aussi parce que c'est la chose intelligente à faire pour créer des emplois et de la croissance économique.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. C'est ce qui m'a fait à la conférence de presse d'aujourd'hui.